Yo, what's happening, guys? It's GM Cody back here again with another overview video. And I guess you can guess what we're going to be talking about tonight. We are going to be actually talking about AD&D 2nd Edition, and specifically the Player's Handbook. And this is going to be kind of a multi-fold video, if you will. We are going to be doing an overview of the Player's Handbook, but I figure, pretty much everybody that's watching my channel is very familiar with AD&D or D&D 2nd Edition. So I'm not going to go into as great a detail like I usually would, just because I think most people are familiar with the basics of D&D and how it works, so I don't have to break down every single thing about how D&D works. But I still will be kind of walking you through the rules for those that are new to the game. I will be explaining, the rules of the game and how this game differs from other editions of D&D. The other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pointing out things that I house rule usually nowadays when I play AD&D 2nd Edition. I've played AD&D 2nd Edition since, I got into gaming. Like I said previously in my other videos, it's one of the first, or the first, role-playing game that I was introduced to, and one of the first I played. And so, I've played every edition of D&D. I own every edition of D&D. But, I've consistently played 2nd Edition throughout all these years, and it's still my, go-to game, when I'm thinking about running a, fantasy or D&D campaign. And nowadays, and pretty much since I was in my 20s, I've incorporated a lot of house rules into AD&D 2nd Edition. Funny enough, like when I'm playing 1st Edition, I don't tend to house rule it as much. I feel like, I don't know why, but 1st Edition has this reverence about it where I tend to like to stick pretty close to rules as written. Pretty close. I ignore some things, but I don't particularly change anything. But when I'm playing 2nd Edition, I do tend to add in some house rules. So I'm going to point out, what I tend to change and the reasons why I do that. And, that's just me. You do you. There was something else I wanted to mention in this. I think that's pretty much it, right? We're gonna look at the Player's Handbook. I'm gonna kind of show you, the rules for those that are new to the game and kind of how to play. And we're gonna talk about the house rules and the changes I made. Now, before we get into that, of course, it's become kind of a tradition of mine to have a little preamble and talk about what's going on in my mind. And this is going to be no exception. Now, this talk is a little bit more serious and a little bit, it's not darker, really. But I thought I'd get it out there. So first thing is there was a little bit of drama this morning for whatever reason, but it is what it is. I'm not a confrontational guy. You really have to push my buttons to get me angry. Now, when I get angry, it's fucking over, but it really takes a lot for me to get there. I can pretty much brush everything off. I've worked construction since I was, 20 years old. So, I take a lot of, you got to be a little rough around the edges, to be in the business I'm in. So I can brush things off pretty easy. I'm not that sensitive. But somebody left a negative comment on one of my videos this morning. It was a stream I did with Bear. He invited me to a stream. And of course, anytime anybody invites me to a stream, especially Bear, I'm going to hop on. And I guess this guy didn't like it. I'm not going to go into great detail, any of that, but I'll just say, I appreciate criticism. I have no problem with anybody leaving a negative review. And actually, he actually motivated me to do some things differently, like labeling videos, because I think some people were unclear that was Bear's stream, not my stream, and I was just part of it. And by the way, I was a willing participant, not a slave, right? And so, I'm going to make that more clear in the future. So thanks, buddy, whoever you were. I don't really know who you were, but appreciate the criticism and help me work some things out with that. So I'll definitely be doing labeling better, because I have not been labeling. I'm not very good at labeling videos. I'm not good at doing thumbnails. I'm not good at all the pizzazz. Unfortunately, I probably could become good at it if I really put the time in. But this is kind of how I like to do it, just dirty, raw, and just turn on the camera and do it. In fact, I don't ever edit my videos, except for the last one I did edit because I was really tired and I zoned out a couple times while I was making that video. So I actually did edit that video, and that was the first video I've ever edited. Well, I mean, I've done some others in the past, video editing, but for YouTube, that's the first one I ever did. So, but usually I just turn on the camera and just talk. So this is what you get with me. You're going to get what it is. And the other thing is, I do this for my own benefit, really. I just love doing this. I love talking about games. And, I love talking to people that love games. Gaming's been a huge part of my life. The two passions, my wife said it the other day, my life, and it's true, is music and games. And those are my two consistent passions and always will be, always have been. There's other things I love and like, but those are my passions. And my wife now, too. But, those have always been my consistent passions in my life. And it's just been one of those constants. It's never changed. I've always been a gamer, and I've always been into music. So anyways, as far as all that's concerned, yeah, I'll do what I want, and I'll continue to do it. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but I do all this for my own benefit and to share it with you guys, and hopefully you enjoy it. I don't try to chase the algorithm. I don't care if this becomes a job. I have a job. I make decent money. I pay the bills. Whatever. Just the way it is. So, hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you don't, I'm sorry. Feel free to, leave some criticism, and maybe it'll inspire me to do something differently, but it doesn't mean I'm going to, constantly chase after what you guys like. I'm just going to do what I like to do, unfortunately. Sorry. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, something, I kind of want to do a whole video on this, but sometimes I just don't have the words. I'm not a very eloquent guy, but I'm an introvert, if you haven't noticed. Big time introvert, actually. It's kind of crippling for me most of the time. And honestly, if it weren't for gaming, I'd probably be even worse off today. Gaming and music being a musician has given me a lot of confidence to speak to people, to lead people, because now I'm in leadership positions, and I have to, it's helped me with all that. But at the same time, it's still, a part of me, and I don't think it's ever going away, that I'd rather be by myself most of the time, in my head, in my own world, doing my own thing. Now, gaming is, it forced me to be social when I was really young. I mean, it's a social thing. And, and it's something I really love about it, because like I, have stated in previous videos, that's how I've made all my best friends in life, longest and dearest friends, is through gaming, and I'm still making long and dear friends. And that's something you just can't, you can't put a price on, really. I've made friends through music and other things, but, those have come and gone. But those friends I made through gaming all those years ago, they're still around, and they're still, my best friends today. So, and like I said, I'm making new friends now, being on YouTube, and it's great. Some great like-minded people. But saying that, still, I'm an extreme introvert. I tend to live in my own head, and nothing's changed from time I was a kid to now, except for I'm more extroverted than I was then, obviously. When I was a kid, I would probably never thought about doing what I'm doing here. And that's another part of the reason I do the YouTube thing, because I really love to talk about games and stuff, but also it just helps me kind of therapeutically to kick a little bit of my introvert, so that's part of the reason I do this. But mostly it's just to talk about games, because I fucking love games so much. And I love talking to other people that love it as well, and are as passionate and everything else about it. So, but it is something I struggle with, anytime I'm invited to any kind of social situation, my mind's always looking for an excuse to get out of it, usually. So, but I force myself to do things, and in the long run, I feel like it's better for me to do so. I'm a much better person because of it. But it doesn't change the fact that that is still my nature. And it's just something worth mentioning. It's something I wanted to get out there only because I've had some people recently, like on the podcast, say Cody, you're quiet, whatever. And first off, I'm not used to doing podcasts with a lot of people. I had my own podcast, which I'm thinking about bringing it back maybe. But that was a different situation because I was the host, and it wasn't like a forum podcast per se. It was just, me and a co-host and a guest, and the guest was really doing most of the talking, and I was just asking questions. And this is a totally new format for me, being live on the internet. Even doing these videos is kind of a new thing for me, or it's a very new thing. I didn't ever really plan on doing YouTube videos. Certain people inspire me to do so, and I've felt the need to do so, and hopefully I have something that people like. They seem to, and you guys seem to, so cool. But that's part of the reason I'm quiet on those things, is because I'm just introverted. But the other, there's another reason to that, and the other reason is it's just kind of the way I was raised. I don't just run my mouth about things I don't know anything about, or try not to anyway. So I'm very conscious of that. And so if I don't know anything about the subject, or if somebody knows the subject better than me, I'm going to let them speak over me. I might have something to add to it, hopefully, but so that's something I've struggled with, but I'm getting more comfortable with it. And be honest, the podcast thing has really helped me out with, all those communication skills, and be less introverted and be more extroverted and everything, so that's been really helpful, and that's why I've continued to do those. And so that was kind of the point of, if you're wondering why I keep doing these podcasts and all these streams and stuff, that's part of the reason, because I do enjoy it. I do like being around like-minded people. It energizes me to hear the passion out of other people talk about, subjects that I'm passionate about. And I like to talk about people, but also just sometimes like to just sit back and listen and add in what I can. And, hopefully I'll be more talkative, but hopefully that's kind of a, I just felt the need to say all that. But anyways, so let's get down to talking about something fun, which is tonight we're talking about AD&D 2nd edition. Now, this is the revised version. I think it came out in 1995. The original version of AD&D 2nd edition came out in 1989. A lot of people don't like this book in particular for whatever reason. I'd never had a problem with it. Of course, this is the first D&D book I saw, so could just be nostalgia talking, but I particularly, don't have a problem with it. I like the formatting. I like the art. Everything's fine to me. So, but I remember even back then, everybody was very critical of this book, of the layout and the art and everything. And I don't particularly have a problem with it. So this is the one we're going to look at just because I think it's easier on the eyes, to look at on a computer screen, and easier on the eyes for you guys to see everything. All right. So AD&D 2nd edition. So we did kind of a broad overview last time. We're not going to talk about like the basics of role-playing and stuff, and we're going to go right into ability scores, and I'm going to blow this up. So 2nd edition AD&D is really no different than any other version of AD&D. You have 6 ability scores, right? You have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, and you can tell what era somebody's what era they started playing D&D from by the order they give the stats from, I think. So you can tell what era I started with. So the differences, the scores are still the same. It goes from 3 to 18. One thing I will say is if you've only played 3rd edition, 4th edition, or 5th edition, I call it the D20 like generation of D&D, is that bonuses are a little bit harder to come by in AD&D games in general. So, first edition, second edition, you have to have a higher score to get a bonus, and the bonuses are typically smaller, depending. So let's start at the first one. So strength, this adjusts everything, everybody thinks about when they think about D&D, your probability hit in melee combat, your damage adjustment in melee combat, your bonus weight allowance, your max press, which is, how much you can lift, open doors, this is a hang around from original D&D, really. And, that's the number you need to beat on or the number you need to roll under on a D20 to force open a door. And it's probably a thing that's not by the second edition era, this probably could have been erased completely. And it's not something I reference or use a whole lot when I'm playing second edition, but it's still hanging around in second edition. Bin bars, lift gates. This is a fun one, very descriptive one. And basically, yeah, it is literally bin bars and lift gates, but it's also, feats of incredible strength is the way I look at it. And I think it's the way it describes it. States the character's percentage chance on a percentile die to bend normal soft iron bars, lift a vertical gate, or perform a similar feat of enormous strength. And so, it really, that's really what I use it more for, is feats of enormous strength. And it's a percentile, system. So you could see you don't even really get like a bonus to hit and damage until you have like at least a 16 strength. So, that's very different from the D20 generation where it's, I think it starts at a 12. I'm pretty sure it's a 12 to 13 is a +1, and then 14 to 15 is a +2, et cetera, et cetera. It's been a while since I've played third edition or any of the editions above, but I'm pretty certain that's what it is. So, that's something to note, that characters are a lot more lower powered than even third edition. Another thing to note about strength is exceptional strength, which is in AD&D first edition as well. This is something only fighter characters get, warrior characters. If you roll an 18 and you're a warrior character, a fighter, paladin, ranger, or, some other class that's in another book, you roll a percentile die, and that's your exceptional strength. And only fighter types get this. So it's something unique to the fighter types. And I will say this is probably something that I do house rule. I was going to say that I would mention things that I change in house rule. I don't change exceptional strength, but I usually only let fighters have exceptional strength. And the reason being is because I feel like being a fighter in AD&D, you're getting a little gypped compared to being a ranger or a paladin. And yes, I know you have to qualify for those classes, and those that don't know what I'm talking about, you'll find out here in a little bit. You have to have certain ability scores to be those classes, but at the same time, with the ability score generation that I use, which is usually 46, drop the lowest, more than likely you're going to have the stats to be a ranger or paladin, more than likely, even though it's still, still hard. It's possible, but I still like to give a reason for somebody just to want to play a straight fighter. So that's one of the things I sometimes change. I don't always do that. I go back and forth with that, but I tend to give, some of the things that all the warrior classes can get only to the fighter. And this is one of them. One of those things that I tend to do from time to time. So, and it might give you, I'm saying these house rules and things just to give you ideas for your game. And it might be applicable to some other version of D&D, whether you're playing, AD&D first edition, or you're playing some retro clone or what have you. So, I feel like it's cool and worth mentioning. I like to hear other people's house rules. So dexterity adjusts your reaction adjustment, which is your chance to be surprised, but it also can adjust your initiative, I believe, if I remember correctly. Missile attack is your missile attack, and your defense adjustment is your armor class bonus, essentially. And I think it also gives you a bonus to saving throws. Let's see. Applies to the character's saving throws against attacks that can be dodged, and also modifies the character's armor class. Constitution. So you have hit point adjustment, system shock, resurrection, survival, poison save, and regeneration. So hit point adjustment, pretty self-explanatory. That's the bonus you get to your hit points every level. System shock is your chance to survive if you take like traumatic injury, or if it's a magical thing that changes your shape or adjusts your age or polymorphs you or anything like that. So if you get turned to stone and then revert back, you roll your system shock to see if you survive. Those kind of things. Resurrection survival's pretty simple to grasp. That's your chance of your soul remaining intact if you're resurrected. Poison save, you get a bonus to poisons, which you have to have a constitution of 19 to get that bonus. And regeneration is a possible thing if you have a constitution of 20, which is damn near impossible unless you have some kind of magical items to help you. You will notice if you look here down towards the bottom of the hit point adjustment, there are bonuses in parentheses there. So what those represent is only fighter types get that hit point bonus. All others only get basically max out at a +2, but fighters can get up to +3, +4, +5, etc., etc. And again, this is something occasionally, if I want to give fighters a little bit more of a purpose, this is something I might tend to house rule is, okay, only fighters, not rangers, not paladins, only fighters get that bonus. Occasionally. I don't do that every time. But, that is something I tend to change from time to time. Intelligence. So intelligence adjusts how many languages you have. Also, if you're using the proficiency system, this is how many bonus non-weapon proficiencies you get instead of languages, and you have to purchase languages as a proficiency. Okay. Spell level. This is the max spell level you can cast if you are playing a mage. Chance to learn spell, pretty self-explanatory. If you're trying to learn a spell, this is the percentile die you have to roll to learn that spell. Max number of spells per level is the max number of spells you can learn per level. And if you have a high enough intelligence, you can get an illusion to certain immunity to certain illusions. So this is one thing I tend to change as well. And I tend to give bonus spells to magic users, mages, at first or second level or whatever. I do this two different ways. I either go by the cleric bonus spell progression or just a little bit higher than that. I might come up with my own progression, but either way, I usually give magic users a bonus based on their intelligence. And that's just a personal preference. I tend to like to have magic users be a little bit more useful at first level. I will say also, I don't always house rule second edition. Sometimes I always give everybody the choice. Whenever I run AD&D, I'm like, do you want to play by the books hardcore mode, or do you want to play, lightweight mode, basically? And, I let the players decide what they want to do. So if we're playing hardcore mode, this is something I don't change, right? We try to stick to the rules as possible and let the dice fall where they may. 0 hit points is death, all that good stuff, And I like to play that way. I think it's a lot of fun to me. I know there's been a lot of talk recently where, these things, a lot of people are saying that, that's not a really fun way to play, but I still find it a fun way to play because it's a challenge. And I like challenging things. So, wisdom. So wisdom adjusts your magical defense, which is your bonus to saves versus charm and fear and illusions and stuff like that. Bonus spells is bonus spells for clerics. And like I was saying earlier, sometimes I give these bonus spells for magic users, even though it might be a little bit much. So what I tend to do is I start at a 15 instead of a 13. So at a 15, a magic user would get 1 bonus first level spell. At 16, they get 2 bonus first level spells. And so basically it would cap out at second level bonus spells is the highest they could get. That's what I tend to do if I'm giving bonus spells to mages. Chance of spell failure. Now, if your wisdom's not high enough, this is your chance of your spells failing. And it is possible if you have a high enough wisdom, epic level, like a 19, that, you could have immunity to certain types of spells. It is worth noting, too, that, like in D20 versions of D&D, having stats over an 18 is not a big deal. But it is very much a big deal in AD&D, all right? Like, it's, an 18 is considered the pinnacle of human ability, and anything over that is considered, like, super heroic, right? So, and you can see it here, where they're getting bonuses to spells and bonus versus saves and regeneration and stuff like that. And it's worth noting that, it's a very big deal to have, like, a 19 dexterity or wisdom or strength or whatever, So, very important to note that. And it is possible to achieve those things. Charisma. So this adjusts how many henchmen you can have, what your loyalty base is for your henchmen and NPCs, and what your reaction adjustment is against NPCs. Pretty self-explanatory. Character races. You have all the typical character races here. You have dwarves, elves, gnomes, half elves, and halflings. Of course, you will note if you are a D20 version, D20 player, is there's no half-orcs here. And there's no, I don't know what they call them, dragonkind or dragonkin or what the hell ever. They're not going to be in here, right? It's just the standard, 5 races here. Now, in first edition, half-orcs were in the book. And this is something they took out of this book. For better or worse, I don't know. But the good thing about AD&D second edition, like I was talking about last time, is you can just go, if you wanted a half-orc, you can just go grab your first edition AD&D Player's Handbook, and it's going to be pretty much completely compatible with this version. So, just something to know. I'm not going to go too far into the races, just because I don't know if it's that interesting particularly, but every race still gets ability adjustments. Now, here's the maximum and minimal ability scores you have to be that race. I tend to avoid the minimums, and the maximums kind of work out themselves, right? So nobody can have a stat over 18 at character creation. And I keep that in play, but the minimums, I just tend to hand wave that stuff. I don't really care. So dwarves get a +1 constitution, -1 charisma. Elves get +1 dexterity, -1 constitution. Gnomes get +1 intelligence, -1 wisdom. And halflings get +1 dexterity, -1 strength. Dwarves, they get some bonuses, they get bonuses versus saves versus magical wands, stabs, rods, and spells. And this bonus is +1 for every 3.5 points of constitution. They also have a bonus against poisons, and it's the same, I think, as the magic save. Of course, they're non-magical in nature, and they have trouble using magical items. So all magical items that are not suited to their character's class have a 20% chance to malfunction when used by a dwarf. In melee, dwarves add 1 to their dice roll to hit orcs, half-orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins. When ogres, trolls, magi, giants, titans attack dwarves, these monsters must subtract -4 from their attack rolls because the dwarves' smaller size, and it also, is just assuming that dwarves are used to fighting these kind of creatures. They have infravision, which allows them to see 60 feet in the dark. Now, infravision is different from dark vision. Infravision is almost like it's heat vision. Okay, it's like kind of like it's infrared vision, right? They see like heat and hot and cold, whatever. They don't actually like see all the details. That's very important. They get bonuses to detect underground constructions and stuff like that as well. Elves. So elves get some bonuses too. They have a 90% resistance to sleep and charm. They get a +1 bonus with any kind of bow other than crossbow. And they also get a +1 when using short or long swords for whatever reason. I understand the bow thing, but they also get a bonus to surprise opponents. They have a bonus when detecting secret doors. And that's about it. I think this is the first piece of like this kind of colored pencil art we run up against. And a lot of people really hate this like color pencil kind of art. I actually kind of like it. I don't know. I'm pretty nostalgic for this, and it's very different from the tone of any other like D&D book. But I kind of dig it. I don't know who the artist was specifically that did all these like color pencil kind of illustrations. It was probably several, and I'm not even sure that this is color pencil or not. It just kind of looks like it to me. From some of my artist friends that do like color pencils and pastels and stuff, it looks very similar to that. So, but I kind of like it. Gnomes. So gnomes, they get a bonus to Constitution against magic, just like dwarves do. They also have the 20% failure when using magic items. In melee, gnomes add 1 to their attack rolls to hit kobolds and goblins, and they get the same bonus to their armor class or subtraction to the attack roll when attacked by like giant class monsters, just like a dwarf. They have infravision, just like a dwarf, and they have a lot of the same like underground detection, same as a dwarf. They're very pretty much just like a dwarf, except for what classes they can play. Half-elves. I tend to throw half-elves out the window nowadays. And basically, I just state you're either... You can play a half-elf, but just pick human or elf. And the reason for that is like the half-elf is just kind of like gimped all around. And I feel like you should pick one or the other. So you could be a half-elf, but are you more elven or are you more human? And that's pretty much the way I treat it. And basically, half-elves get a lot of the same stuff elves do. It's just like half of what an elf is. So I tend to just throw half-elves out the window. And again, you can play a half-elf. Just pick whether you're going to be, the elf template or a human template, and that would decide what your lineage is more strongly leans to. Halflings. So halflings get a bonus, just like dwarves, to magic saves and poisons. Excuse me. They also get a bonus to slings and thrown weapons, +1. They have a bonus to surprise, just like elves do, pretty much. And you have to choose what kind of halfling you are, and that determines whether you have infravision, and it can be up to 30 feet or 60 feet. And depending on your heritage, you also can have some bonuses to detecting grades and such. Sure. In a dungeon situation, that might be useful. And humans don't get any bonuses per se. What they do get in AD&D is there's a thing called level limits, which is pretty infamous at this point. And there's a lot of arguments about level limits. And essentially the whole thing is that humans do not have level limits, and demi-human characters do. Nowadays I tend to throw this out for a couple of reasons, and a lot of people have better reasons than I do, but it's pretty easy. I think that if you're playing an elf or a dwarf that's been around for hundreds or thousands of years, I think you would have the same potential as a human to rise up through the ranks. And the other thing is, most of my campaigns just don't last that long. So it never really kicks in. So, but that's just my personal thing. Occasionally I leave them in there if I'm playing, rules as written. But what I tend to do nowadays is I just give humans a flat out plus 10% bonus to experience points. And what I found that does is it makes a lot more people play humans, actually. Shocking, right? For some reason, that plus 10 bonus, even it's not a huge bonus, but it's significant enough. People tend to like that. And it gives a little bit more reason to play human. And yeah, so it seems like a lot of times when I run AD&D 2nd edition and I use that house rule, a lot of people tend to play humans. So, and I got that from Basic Fantasy Role Playing, which is a cool little kind of retro clone of BX, essentially, with some modern things, and maybe we'll look at that. I think it's a cool little game. But that's what they do in Basic Fantasy Role Playing, and I have adapted that rule since I saw that rule when the game first came out. So anyways, here's all the tables for, race, height, and age, and all that good jazz. Classes. Like we were discussing earlier, you have to have certain minimums in ability scores to be a certain class. And we'll walk through those as we walk through them. Now, one thing to note, and I kind of brought this up in my introduction to AD&D, is that, a lot of the rules are presented as options, and this is no different here. I don't remember where it says it. It's not completely explicit, but it basically says, if you just want to play with the core classes, which are fighter, cleric, thief, and magic user, you can, and that all the other classes are considered optional. And to be honest with you, I really don't remember where it says that at. Here it is, right here at the beginning. Fighter, mage, cleric, and thief are the standard classes. Thus, they are appropriate to any sort of AD&D campaign. All other classes are optional. So, something interesting to note, even though, I always use all the classes when I'm playing 2nd edition. And they group them into warrior, wizard, priest, and rogue. So warriors, you have the fighter. To be a fighter, you have to have a strength of 9. Fighters can use all armor, all weapons. They do get a bonus experience. They get an experience point bonus if they have a strength of 16 or higher. This is something, the experience point bonus thing, sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Just depends how I'm feeling at the moment. But usually I leave it in there. Of course, they get exceptional strength. They get D10 hit points per level. Any race can play a fighter. And, and they get, this applies to all warriors. They get additional attacks as they level up. They also get weapon specialization, which we'll look at later. So that's a fighter. And, of course, when they hit level 9, if they build a keep or a castle, they can attract followers. And here's all the tables for the followers they can get. Paladins, this is the classic holy warrior. Now, to qualify to be a paladin in AD&D requires some pretty good die rolls. You need a strength of 12, constitution of 9, a wisdom of 13, and a charisma of 17. So only humans can play paladins. And I usually stick to the races, class restrictions for races, typically. But I do make exceptions from time to time. I always tell people, we're sticking to that. Now, I might make a special circumstance depending on what choice it is. And I'd rather have I'd rather do that just because I don't tend to like, if I'm playing a 2nd edition game, I want a more like traditional D&D experience. And I tend not to like goofy kind of characters. But usually whatever players, if they really want to play something, I'll let them do it. So I've had elven paladins and things in the past, but I tend to keep that intact. So only humans can be a paladin. So a paladin gets a lot of abilities. They can detect the presence of evil. They get a +2 bonus to all saving throws. They're immune to all diseases. They can lay on hands. This restores 2 hit points per experience level on himself or others. They can cure diseases. This can only be done once per week for each 5 levels of experience. They are surrounded by an aura of protection, 10-foot radius. When using a holy sword, they project a circle of power. They gain the ability to turn undead and fiends. And they get a special war horse at 4th level. And at 9th level, they're able to cast priest spells. And again, here's another and we did look at the fighter. Let's look at the fighter. I like the fighter one a lot. And this is definitely painted though. This isn't watercolor or anything, but I dig these. I don't know. And the paladin one's cool too. Nice mustache, dude. So the paladin does have restrictions, of course. They have to be lawful good. They may not possess more than 10 magical items. They never retain their wealth. They must tie 10%. They can attract followers just like a fighter. And they only employ lawful good henchmen. And here's all the charts for, they start getting spells at level 9 and et cetera, et cetera. Ranger. This is the second edition Ranger is probably my favorite class of all time. It was my favorite class when I was a kid. I think it was a lot of people's favorite class. I don't think that's unusual. But when I was a kid, I loved the Ranger. And this is my favorite version of the Ranger, is in AD&D second edition. I also really like the first edition Ranger too. They're very different in approach. And I like both of them, but I grew up playing the second edition Ranger, and it's my favorite. So to be a Ranger, you have to have a strength of 13, a dexterity of 13, constitution of 14, and a wisdom of 14. Only humans, elves, and half-elves can be Rangers. This is different from first edition. In first edition, only humans and half-elves could be Rangers until Unearthed Arcana, and then they let elves play it, even though I think most people tended to hand-wave that because it makes sense for elves to be Rangers. If their strength, dexterity, and wisdom are 16 or more, they get a plus 10 bonus to experience. They can use any weapons and armor, though they are restricted if they are using their special skills. They have they're skilled woodsmen, and even if the optional proficiency rules aren't used, they get tracking proficiency for free, and this increases as they go up in level. They get a favored enemy before advancing the second level. Every ranger must select a species enemy, and when they select that enemy, they get a plus 4 bonus to their attack rolls, and they suffer a minus 4 penalty to all encounter reactions with creatures of that hatred type. And of course, they will actively seek out that enemy in preference of all other foes, etc., etc. Rangers are adept with trained and untamed animals, so they get a bonus to taming and animal empathy and all that stuff, which is really cool. They can learn pre-spells when they hit level 8. They can build castles, forts, and strongholds, but do not gain any special followers by doing so. At 10th level, a ranger just automatically attracts 2d6 followers, and they could be animals or humans. And there's some special animals in here like Pegasus and hippogriffs and stuff. And they have the thief skills of hide in shadows and move silently. Of course, if they're wearing anything above, I think, studded leather, they cannot use those abilities. And of course, they have a code of behavior just like the paladin, which we didn't discuss. The paladin has a code, and the ranger's no different. Also, a cool thing about the second edition Ranger is they can use they can dual wield weapons without any penalties. Also, when wearing studded leather or lighter. Yes, and that's a cool ability. Anyways, wizards. Wizard. You have basically mage and specialist, pretty much the same thing. So, a mage is a mage. Their main thing is they cast spells, right? Arcane spells. They have to have an intelligence of 9 or higher. Only humans, elves, and half-elves can be mages. One cool thing about second edition mages is they can be a specialist. And you pick a specialization from a school of magic, like necromancy or invocation or illusionist or whatever. And you have to have a certain ability score to do that. And when you do that, you get bonus spells from your school. You can also memorize more spells from that school, but you also have an opposition school. And I don't... hold on just a second. I can't remember the rule. I can't... okay, they just can't learn any of those opposition spells. I couldn't remember off the top of my head for some reason. I used to have all this shit memorized. They also get a bonus to learning spells from that school. And they get a penalty from learning spells from other schools. So I think it's fair to say I do house rule the mage a little bit. So one thing I do about the mage is I Well, I didn't state it up front. I tend to always give people maximum hit points at first level. I think we all do that nowadays, though not always. Sometimes if we're playing hardcore mode, sorry, man, my throat is really raw today. I really hate that. Sometimes if we're playing hardcore mode, we still roll the hit points. It just depends. But usually I just give people maximum hit points. And the same rings true pretty much with any version of D&D I play. So that helps mages out a little bit. At least I get 4 hit points, plus if they get a constitution bonus. The other thing I tend to do is I give them bonus spells to memorize at first level. So, magic users typically can only memorize 1 spell a day. I was looking for the magic user chart to show you. So they only start off at level 1. You can only memorize 1 spell a day. Now, I tend to give them bonus spells that they can memorize. So that's how I do it. Now, what spells you start with, it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It has a lot of good reference for what spells you get. What I tend to do is I give them Read Magic and 3 spells either of my it just depends what mood I'm in. Sometimes it's of my choosing. Sometimes I make them roll. And sometimes I just let them choose. Most of the time I make them roll. I think that's really fun. But I always make sure that they have useful spells for the most part. At least one good combat spell so they can be somewhat useful. But other than that, I like kind of leaving it up to the dice. So that is magic users. Priest, basically you have clerics. That's a priest. So clerics have to have a wisdom of 9. Oh, it's worth noting also about the magic user. Of course, they can't wear armor. They can't use shields. And they're very limited what weapons they can use. So worth noting if you've never played AD&D. Clerics. So clerics gets, cleric spells. You have clerics and druids, of course. You have to have a wisdom of 9. They can only use the base cleric in AD&D can only use blunt weapons. They can wear any armor, and they get cleric spells. They have to pick a deity, and that kind of determines their alignment as well, right? But the interesting thing about 2nd edition clerics is you can be a priest of a specific mythos, and depending on how your DM, if you're playing in a set world, your DM is supposed to, if you're playing in a published campaign setting like Forgotten Realms, it's going to tell you what each deity, their bonuses and stuff. So priest of specific mythos, they can use other types of weapons. They also get bonus spells to certain realms, okay? And they're also blocked off from certain other realms. Which is cool. And they also get, a bonus ability. Now, the druid in this edition is basically an example of a specific type of cleric. Is not particularly it is a class on its own, but it's also it states that this is kind of an example of what a specific priest would look like of a specific mythos is the druid. And the druid gets some of their own abilities too, more so than probably a specialized cleric would. And both classes get D8 hit points per level. And druids can use some more weapons. They can only wear natural armors. They have druid spells. They get a bonus to elemental attacks, essentially. They can identify plants and animals. After he reaches 3rd levels, they can pass through overgrown areas when they reach 3rd levels. They can learn the language of woodland creatures. They're immune to charm spells cast by woodland creatures after 7th level. And later on, when they reach 7th level, they're able to shape change. And they cannot turn undead. Clerics can turn undead, right? And it goes through the druid organization and all that stuff. And now we are on to rogues. And of course, the quintessential rogue is the thief. So the thief, you have to have a dexterity of 9. All races can be a thief. The thief is only, they're restricted to studded leather armor is the best they can do. Don't they? Hold on. They can also wear elven chain. Couldn't remember if they can use shields or not. I want to say they can't, but I can't honestly remember, and I don't see it on here whether they can use shields or not. Either way, they're restricted to the armor they can wear up to basically studded leather. They are allowed to wear elven chainmail, which is a rarity to find. It's, basically a magic item. And they have thief skills, is what they're all about. So, the thief skills are percentile based. This is where you're breaking away from like the D20 model of unified mechanics. AD&D goes all over the place in different types of mechanics. You roll over some things, you roll under some things are percentile, some things are D20, etc., etc., etc. So the thief skills are pickpockets, open locks, find remove traps, move silently, hide in shadows, detect noise, climb walls, read languages. So essentially you start off with a certain amount in these skills, and you adjust for your race, you adjust for your dexterity, and then you get a certain amount of points per level to add to those skills. All right. And, so this is probably one thing to discuss is thief skills, how I handle them. So I think I handle thief skills a little bit differently. To me, these are just exceptional skills. So anybody can move silently, right? But to me, like a thief is exceptional at it. And so what I tend to do is like if a party is like sneaking up and trying to surprise a bunch of individuals, I'll roll surprise for everybody, but the thief is also getting moved silently. You kind of have to think of it that way. Now, certain of these skills, I don't think everybody would be able to perform. Open locks, find and remove traps, all that stuff. You could try to do it, and probably what I would do is just do the base percentage and roll that for anybody that's attempting this that is not a thief. So you could try, but you're going to be at a very low percentage to do it. So that's kind of how I handle thief skills. I let people attempt them basically, but they only get like the base percentage, and that's it. Thieves can also backstab, of course, and they get a bonus to hit, and of course they deal double damage. You also get an adjustment to your thief skills based on what kind of armor you're wearing. And thieves have Thieves' Cant. And this is the backstab multiplier for, every 4 levels, basically, that goes up. So, if 1 to 4, it's times 2, 5 to 8, it's times 3, etc., etc. They can also use magical scrolls when they hit 10th level. And they get D6 hit points per level. They can also, start a Thieves Guild and gain followers. The Bard. So this is probably my favorite version of the Bard, too. So the Bard is literally a jack of all trades in this. They get D6 hit points. They basically have the same kind of stuff as a thief does as far as like weapons and armor and such. But they can also cast magic user spells starting at 2nd level. They're not as good as a magic user, but they can do that. And usually I don't give the bards the bonus magic user spells. Only magic users do that. But, whatever. They also get thief skills. Some of them. They get climb walls, detect noise, pickpockets, and read languages. Bards can also influence reactions, of course, by playing or singing songs and telling tales and such. They can be inspiring. They can counter the effects of songs and poetry. And finally, they learn a little bit of everything. Thus, all bards can read and write their native tongue, and all know local history. Furthermore, bards have a 5% chance per experience level to identify the general purpose and function of any magic item. So pretty cool. So that's the Bard, and I think it's a cool version of the Bard. I like the 2nd edition Bard quite a bit. They do have some higher than usual ability score requirements. They have to have a dexterity of 12, intelligence 13, charisma 15, and only humans and half-elves can play a bard. So that's all the classes, essentially. Multi-classing, this is something by the book that only demi-humans can do. This is something I tend to house rule. I let humans multi-class too, but usually only into the basic 4 types of classes. So when you're multi-classing, it's dependent on your race, and you can have up to 3 classes at first level. You don't multi-class as you level up. You start with multiple classes. I'm fine with multi-classing. Never had a problem with it. I think it makes more sense at first level. You kind of dabbled in this and you kind of dabbled in that, and you're kind of good at both things, but you're not a master of both. And essentially, you split your hit die between however many classes you have. You split your experience points amongst however many classes you have, etc., etc. And you still have to adhere to the restrictions for each class, with a few exceptions. Dual classing is something I just don't do. Don't like it. I don't use it. I don't let people use it. I just don't like it. But essentially what you can do is only humans can do it, and they have to have a score, a certain ability score, and they can literally change their class. All right, anytime after reaching second level. Not a fan of this. I don't allow it. Never used it. Yeah, so, but it is there if you want to use it. I've always liked this drawing here. This is probably one of my favorite in the book. And actually, I think this is what made me want to play a ranger when I was a kid. Is when I saw this. For some reason, this guy looks really cool to me with his cloak, and he's out in the snow, and he doesn't look terribly confident, which is interesting. But it's a really cool painting. I think I like it. Alignment, of course, you have the usual alignments here. D&D alignments: lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, neutral good, true neutral, neutral evil, chaotic good, chaotic neutral, chaotic evil. I've stated before, I'm just whatever about alignments. Now, if you're playing D&D, you're kind of stuck with alignments, right? Unless you make some big alterations. And I'm fine. I don't really have a huge stake in the alignment wars as it is. So I'm fine either way, but so it's D&D alignments, it's fine. I just usually keep it as is. Always loved this one too. This is probably one of my other favorites in this book, is this halfling with the big floppy hat stealing all the gold. And if you haven't noticed, I like halflings. So, and I think this guy had a lot to do with that. That, and of course, Bilbo Baggins and whatever, because I loved The Hobbit growing up, and it's still one of my favorite books of all time. So yeah, alignment. Proficiencies. So you have weapon proficiencies and you have non-weapon proficiencies. Now, every class gets a certain amount of slots in both of these, and you also get a penalty if you're using a weapon you're not proficient in. And of course, you can only be proficient in weapons that your class can be proficient in. You're still restricted by your class. I will state also that I tend to be a little laxy-daisy sometimes about weapon restrictions, depending. Just depends what kind of mood I'm in, again. Non-weapon proficiencies are much the same way. Get a certain number of slots per level. And essentially, so the way weapon proficiencies work is you spend a slot on that weapon, you learn that weapon, and that's it. Fighters can specialize for 2 slots, and they get a bonus to hit and damage. There's also further rules. I don't think they're in this book. They are not, I don't believe, but there is weapon mastery. And I think there's something above that, where you can spend 3 or 4 slots and be even better at a weapon. So there is that. This is something I tend to, no matter how I'm playing, I tend to only give to fighters. So fighters are a little bit more specialized and have a little bit more of a point, in my opinion. And also when you specialize, you get bonus attacks as you level up. Non-weapon proficiencies, they do have secondary skills in here if you want a really easy way to do it, kind of like in first edition AD&D, kind of a carryover from that. We never did secondary skills. We always did non-weapon proficiencies ever since I started playing. And this is something I tend to kind of house rule as well. So the way it works by the book, it's like I said, you get a certain number of slots. Anybody can buy from the general and whatever your class type is. You can buy from other class types, but it costs an extra slot to do so. That's basically how it works. Every time you buy a slot in that proficiency, it increases the proficiency rating based on what your ability score is. So say you bought agriculture, you have an intelligence of 15, you bought one slot in it, your proficiency in that would be a 15. If you bought another slot in it, it would be a 16, etc., etc., etc. Now, by the book also, you have penalties based on how hard the proficiency is or whatever. Now, I tend to ignore the proficiency penalties, and I tend to not really care about what the score is for the proficiency. I usually just rank proficiencies by, like ranks 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, and that kind of gives me an idea how skilled you are in that proficiency. That's usually how I handle it, only because they rarely come into play for most time for my groups. But it's cool to have, these extra skills in play. And D&D is not really like a skill-heavy game, so that's how proficiencies work, essentially. Here's the cover art inside the book. I think Jeff Easley did this cover art, and it's fucking awesome. So let's skip ahead. Where are we? Money and equipment. So, standard things here. You have copper pieces, silver pieces, electrum, gold, and platinum. It is still like the 10 for 1 kind of system. You roll for however much funds you have, and you buy your equipment. Simple as that. Funny story with that. I remember when I first started playing AD&D, as a player, not as a DM, as a player, the DM made us buy everything at first level. So we had to buy like every piece of clothing we had. Every single thing we had to buy. I guess it's still that way, except for like the clothing part. But I always thought that was funny. He'd be like, "No, you got to buy do you have your boots and your underwear and your fucking pants and your shirt and everything." I always thought that was funny, and I didn't know any difference. And we played that way for years until I think 3rd edition came around, and it just told you, hey, you get some clothes or whatever. You don't have to worry about that. But so that was really funny, and I do that every once in a while too, just because it kind of is nostalgic for me. So you got all your typical equipment here, armor. You got all your armor here. Of course, armor class in this is descending armor class. Starts at 10 for no armor and can go all the way down to -10, which is, epic level armor class where you got to have magical enchantments and +5 plate mails and things like that. But this is like, epic level monster kind of armor class. But -10 is the best. Weapons, you have the weapons here. Couple things to note with weapons is the speed factors. Now, the speed factor system is really interesting. I don't use this every time, but it is pretty cool. So when you roll initiative, you roll a d10. You're looking for the lowest number. So you subtract your reaction, and you add your speed factor. So whoever has the lowest initiative goes first. So as you can imagine, the bigger, heavier weapons have a higher speed factor, and they add to your initiative. So it's a cool system, and I like it, and I dig it, and I tend to use it from time to time. Another thing to note about weapons is they deal different damage depending on the size of the creature. Of course, this is the same in 1st edition, and it's just something to note in case you've never played AD&D before. So, they list it between small and medium and large creatures, and depending on the weapon, they deal different damage against those types of creatures. You got all your usual weapons here, all your usual armor. That's a cool picture with the Hydra. Of course, we got to show off all the pole arms. Mr. Gygax would be proud. Armor class ratings. This is the chart that shows you what armor class you have, depending on what what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever armor and shield combination you have, right? And your armor class is adjusted by your dexterity too. Rules for getting in and out of armor. Optional rules like encumbrance, and they have a few different types of encumbrance rules. And here it is based on your strength and how much you can carry, and your movement rate based on your encumbrance. Always like this picture too, with this like sorcerer dude blocking out. I guess these are orcs or something, but it's cool. And I always like these purple lizards down here. Magical armor and encumbrance. Magic. All right. So we're into magic now. Now we're not going to go through every spell. I'm not even going to really go through spells, to be honest with you. I do love this picture, though. This is really cool. Yeah, the art's cool in this book. I dig it. I mean, don't get me wrong. The art in the original second edition Player's Handbook is really damn good, too. But I love the art in this one, too. I mean, look at that. That's cool, man. Spells are pretty much spells. Experience points, we'll probably talk about this later, but experience rewards in second edition are handled way differently than in first edition. So in first edition, you basically get experience based on, how much gold you get and how many monsters you kill by the book. In second edition, you get experience rewards not for gold, but for the things you accomplish in your class. So if you do a certain skill, or you cast a certain spell, or whatever, you get experience points for that. You also get experience points based on the monsters you kill as well, by the book. Nowadays, I tend to kind of like estimate. I kind of have like my own experience chart in my head. Maybe I'll tell you sometime how I do that, but I have like a really simple way in my head. I don't have it written out or anything. It's from years of playing. I'm like, okay, this is going to be worth this much. It's going to be worth this much. They've been playing this long. This is how much experience they get. That's tend to what I do nowadays. Or I tend to either that, or I just go with like a milestone kind of thing. I'm like, okay, they're level 1. They've played 2 sessions. They level up. I tend to do something like that. Just depends what kind of mood I'm in. Combat. We'll probably go more into combat later. No, we'll go into it a little bit here. So basically, you'd roll for surprise, which I believe is a D10. You're going to roll for initiative, which is a D10. And like we were talking about earlier, if you're using speed factors, you're going to add your speed factor. You're going to add your reaction. Lowest goes first, counting up. And then, when you make an attack, you roll D20, and you subtract your Thaco. Now, this is something people either love or hate Thaco. I've never had a problem with it. Never been an issue for me. I don't understand why everybody has such an issue. It's exactly the same thing as rolling a D20 and adding attack modifiers, except you're subtracting. So never had an issue with it. Never had a trouble wrapping my head around it. And so every character class type, their Thaco goes down by a certain amount. Like I said, if you don't know how Thaco works, you roll D20, you add all your bonuses, to hit, magical bonuses, whatever. You subtract your Thaco, and whatever that number is the armor class you hit. So if you roll the 20, your Thaco's 20, you hit armor class 0. And that's usually how I train my players to say it. Or they tell me, I'm like, okay, what armor class? Armor class 0. All right, cool. Armor class 1, 2, whatever. Whatever number they tell me is what the armor class number is they hit. Pretty simple. To be honest, most of the times, I don't even need to know. Like, they can just tell me. If somebody's really confused by Thaco, I'm just like, just tell me what you rolled to hit. Because I know what their Thaco is, and I can add it up in my head. And it takes me 2 seconds to be like, okay, you hit and miss, whatever. So, no problems there for me. It is interesting to note, though, that I remember towards the tail end of second edition, we actually, and I don't remember how it worked, but we started using an ascending armor class system before third edition came out. And I don't remember how that worked. But yeah, I do remember doing that right before third edition came out. And then, of course, third edition hit the shelves, and we were like, holy shit, they stole our idea like we did something new. I'm sure we're not the only ones that did this. So there's different options in here for combat, different optional initiative systems, multiple attacks in initiative, spellcasting in initiative. So spellcasting kind of works the same way. Instead of like your speed factor determines, your type of spell and the casting, how long it takes to cast. Your casting time is your speed factor for casting a spell. Attacking with 2 weapons is a -2, -4 penalty. Your offhand weapon has to be smaller. You cannot dual wield 2 long swords, even though back in the day we did this all the time anyways. You can't use a shield either. And this is adjusted by your dexterity, your bonus, your reaction bonus adjusts your 2-weapon fighting, just like in first edition AD&D. Now, a ranger, of course, gets no penalties whatsoever, no matter what. Punching and wrestling, you have this chart here, which is kind of silly, and one of my least favorite things about AD&D, and I just tend to ignore it, but it's there. So, you roll a d20, tells you how much damage you did, and then you have a certain percentage to knock out the opponent. I tend to just kind of ignore this or whatever, but is what it is. It's not a bad system. Overbearing and wrestling, it's a lot easier in this than it is in first edition. And it works just fine. Weapons and non-lethal combat, of course. Ranged weapons have rates of fire, depending on what kind of weapons they are. Gives rules here for grenade-like missiles and saving throws. Of course, saving throws are very different than they are in, the D20 versions. So you don't have will, reflex, fortitude. You have paralyzation, poison, death magic, rod, staff, and wand, petrification, and polymorph, breath, weapon, and spell. And these numbers are the numbers you need to roll equal to or over to make a saving throw. I've never had a problem with this saving throw system, personally, and I also kind of like it. Like it's like, it's kind of cool to say make a save versus, death magic, as opposed to make a make a fortitude save or a will save or whatever. Make a save versus fucking breath weapon, make a reflex save. Don't get me wrong, the 3 save system's a lot easier, but I do like the descriptive feeling of the old school D&D saves, and don't have a problem with them at all, and just use them as is. Even though I have also used from time to time, very rarely, I usually just use these as is, but from time to time I do use Swords and Wizardry had this 1 save system where you just had 1 save, and I really like that. I think it's very eloquent, and I've used that a few times with AD&D. And occasionally in AD&D you also make an ability check as a saving throw. Just, it's whatever the DM calls for. Turning undead. So here's the turning undead table for priests, clerics, and how much undead they how much undead they turn and all that good stuff. Injury and death. Of course, by the rules, 0 hit points is death. But I think it has other rules in here concerning that, I think, or it might be in the monsters manual. They have some optional rules like the negative hit point system and whatever. And that's what I tend to do nowadays, is negative 10 hit points is death if I'm playing AD&D. Occasionally I'll go back to the 0 hit points is death. and it makes a very tense game and fun game, in my opinion. Healing, natural healing is slow, right? You gain 1 hit point per day of rest. Bed rest, you gain 3 hit points per day. For each complete week of bed rest, the character can add any Constitution hit point bonus. That's fine, I guess. I tend to speed up the healing rates quite a bit. Just depends how I'm feeling. Only because it kind of sucks for the, especially low-level characters having to go back to town and, they get in one fight. They have to go all the way back to town. They're probably going to die along the way. I don't know. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but it also, if I'm playing want to play a little bit more lax, I tend to lax up on the healing and do different things for that. There's different ways I do that. Whole slew of house rules, different ways to do that. So, poison doesn't necessarily just kill a character outright, like in first edition. It just depends on the poison. Raising the dead, of course. Treasure types, which is not going to go into too much detail about treasure, only because this is the player's handbook. Let's see, encounters. The surprise roll, like we were talking about, you roll a D. The DM's going to roll a D10, and I said 1 to 2. It's actually 1, 2, or 3, affected by the surprise bonus of the monster. NPCs, hirelings, followings, henchmen, vision, light. Visibility ranges with light sources and such. Time and movement, base movement rates of characters. Climbing rates and such, climbing rules, rates of climbing. And we are into wizard spells, which we're probably not going to look at. We're not going to go through every spell. I'm just being real with you guys. And, pretty much all the classic spells, even if you are, I call it the D20 generation of player, like a 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, you're going to recognize pretty much all these spells. Most of the spells, all these spells I think are going to be in those future editions of D&D. And 2nd edition has a really healthy dose of spells, more so than 1st edition. And, but it still has all the spells you had in 1st edition. It is interesting to note there's no 0 level spells. There's no cantrips in the player's handbook, though I think one of the books introduced cantrips, maybe the Tome of Magic. I can't remember off the top of my head. And of course, you could bring cantrips over from Unearthed Arcana, the 1st edition supplement, if you really wanted to. I tend not to, but and also it is worth noting there is a spell called Cantrip that does the same thing. So I'm fine with just leaving it at that. And so that is pretty much it. And then at the back of the book, you got some tables. So that is pretty much it, talking about AD&D 2nd Edition Player's Handbook. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Sorry to get a little bit serious at the beginning of the video. I just felt the need to talk about that, those things, and let people know where I'm coming from with those kind of things. And hopefully that didn't bother you guys too much for me to talk about it. And I hope you guys, enjoyed the video. So I want to discuss kind of what we got coming up. So Thursday, we're going to have my buddy Andrew on, and then we're going to be talking some old school miniature gaming, old hammer, if you will. No, though we won't just be talking about Warhammer. I call all that old hammer. He's an avid miniatures player. He's not so much. He likes role-playing games, and we played role-playing games in our youth. But nowadays, he doesn't really play as many role-playing games. He just plays miniature games, and he's really big into that. And, I am too, even though, past few months I haven't been so hot and heavy on it. I've been a war gamer all my life, a miniature collector. And so I thought it'd be cool to have Andrew on and kind of reminisce about our youth. Of course, he was the one that got me into the hobby, so ask him how he got into the hobby, because I've never actually asked him that, and it might be interesting to hear. And just kind of reminisce about our youth and talk about some miniatures and talk about what he's working on, and should be a lot of fun. Also coming up Sunday, we will be continuing the Prowlers and Paragons game. Hopefully, if somebody's internet does go out again. Either way, I'm pretty determined we're going to continue the Prowlers and Paragons game. And that's all I really got coming up. I won't be on the Four Color Cafe tomorrow. I'm got something going on tomorrow night. I will be missing doing that because I have a lot of fun doing the Four Color Cafe. And that's about it as far as things coming up. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this overview of the AD&D 2nd Edition Player's Handbook. Hopefully you learned something, or hopefully maybe you just got nostalgic about it like I've been doing. And we'll see you next time. So I hope you guys have a good night. We'll see you later. Peace.